Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So glad you're joining us again. We're here to roll up our sleeves, get into your sources, and pull out those really essential nuggets, giving you that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed without all the noise. Today, we're diving into a topic that feels pretty universal: caring and sharing. Our source material is a guide really focused on building relationships, making meaningful connections, especially from a faith perspective.
Exactly. And our mission here is to pull out the practical stuff, the actionable insights from this guide. We're looking at, okay, how do you genuinely show care? How do you get good at listening? And maybe the trickiest part, how do you figure out when it's the right time for those deeper, more personal talks? The goal is really understanding how all these pieces fit together to build connection, so you can be properly informed on this blend of, let's say, relationship building and what the source calls spiritual outreach.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The guide kicks off by really emphasizing consistency. Specifically, it talks about maintaining a, quote, ministry of daily prayer for people and keeping a prayer journal, for requests and answers. Now, that phrase, ministry of daily prayer, might sound a bit specific to some listeners. What's the core principle there?
Yeah, that's a good point. The language is specific, but the core idea is broader. This prayer journal, as the source describes it, isn't just for general well wishes. It's specifically for praying for what it terms their salvation, so their spiritual transformation, their connection with God.
Yeah.
And this daily, consistent practice, the source argues, is sort of presented as real evidence of your care. It's framed as a foundational thing, putting someone at the center of your thoughts regularly.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting for me. Beyond prayer, it stresses building actual personal relationships. But it comes with this pretty clear warning. Don't come on too strong too early. That's a tough balance. How does the source say we should handle that? Wanting to connect, but also being gentle.
Oh, it's critical. Because it's easy to get ahead of yourself, isn't it? The advice is basically, once you've started praying consistently, you generally need to let them take the lead on going deeper, let them initiate more communication or show interest in spiritual stuff. It's really about patience and sensing, the source says, God's responses, rather than just pushing your own agenda. It advocates for this really deliberate, slow pace, which, feels very different from how things usually move today.
And it goes even deeper, suggesting you create a detailed profile for each person in that prayer journal. Not just names and numbers, but likes, dislikes, hobbies, family stuff, goals, dreams, fears, hurts, joys, struggles.
Yeah.
Everything you learn over time. So what's the thinking behind that? Why get so detailed?
Well, the source puts it quite directly. It says, listing these things gives you vital keys to his heart. Which isn't just a spiritual idea, is it? It taps into that basic human need we all have to feel truly seen and understood. I mean, in our world, which can be pretty surface level, that kind of deep, empathetic observation is rare. And because it's rare, it can be really powerful. So it makes you think, doesn't it? For you listening, how often do you really commit to that level of detailed observation and, record keeping about the people in your life? It's a big shift.
Okay, so you've got this foundation. Consistent prayer, deep understanding. How do you actually connect them? The guide is really clear that one of the biggest ways to show care and open doors for those deeper chats is listening. Just listening well. And it breaks listening down into 5 basic stages.
It does, and it adds a really interesting layer to what we normally think of as active listening. Stage 1 is anchor. This is about getting yourself centered spiritually first, asking for divine love and good ears to really hear them. It's fascinating, isn't it? That focus on internal prep before you even start listening. Then stage 2, focus. This is about intentional listening, showing your eager, ready, body language is right, gently inviting them to share, full presence. Third is summarize. So you rephrase what they said in your own words, but, and this is key, without changing the meaning or adding your own comments. The guide specifically says don't jump in to solve problems or share your own stories yet. Gives a good example for acknowledging feelings, like saying, wow, that must have made you feel sad, happy, frustrated, whatever, when that happened. Fourth stage, invite. This just means encouraging them to say more. Keep doing it until they feel completely finished. Make sure they've gotten it all out. And finally, stage 5, ask. Using open-ended questions, not yes-no ones, to clarify things, helping them really unpack their thoughts fully.
That's a really thorough framework. Wow. It also gives advice on listening sympathetically, but steering clear of gossip. How do you manage that? Conversations can wander easily.
Yeah, they can. The key, according to the source, is keep the focus squarely on the speaker's life, not other people. The exception is immediate family, because obviously their lives directly impact the person you're talking to. But if they keep bringing up others, the source suggests a very direct but gentle redirect. It literally gives the phrase, I'm not here to talk about them. I am here because I am interested in you and your life. Hmm. And interestingly, it also says to allow negative opinions about Christians without arguing.
Without arguing.
Right. The bigger idea seems to be about showing love by just listening to complaints, even criticisms, instead of getting defensive straight away. That kind of openness, the source suggests, can actually build trust and maybe open a door later for real understanding.
Okay, so listening is huge. But beyond that, the deep dive talks about other practical ways to show care, starting with acts of kindness.
Yes, and it gives loads of really concrete examples. It really emphasizes that care isn't always about big dramatic things. Often it's the small, consistent, practical stuff, like, meeting new neighbors with a small gift and a card. Or if someone's sick or just had a baby, bringing a meal making. Sure, it fits their culture too. Simple things like watching a neighbor's kids so the parents get a break, visiting people who are sick or can't get out, maybe bringing something useful or just something to read. It also suggests just inviting neighbors over, even if the house isn't perfect, sharing extra food if you've cooked something special.
That feels very neighborly, very community-focused.
Exactly. Things like hosting holiday parties, planning a neighborhood picnic or sports event to bring people together, helping out with practical tasks like gardening or field work if that's relevant, offering rides, picking things up from the market if you're going anyway and have a car, even just walking around your neighborhood and actually talking to people you see. It's about presence and simple, helpful actions.
Then the source talks about giving the gift of time, which feels a bit different from just doing tasks for someone. What's the distinction there?
Yeah, it is different. It's less about the doing and more about the being with. The source really stresses deliberately making time just to be with people, show you're interested in them, not just what you can do for them. This could mean doing things you both enjoy. Maybe you figure out some common interests, watch a movie, go to a game, just go for a walk together. But again, there's that caution, don't try to force it. Real mutual relationships, they take time to grow naturally. It's about presence, not productivity.
And then for people whose spiritual interest starts to pick up, there's the gift of fellowship.
Right. So if and when that interest grows, the source suggests you could offer to introduce them to other Christian friends you have, people who are warm and loving. Or invite them to Christian events. If you're in a small group, maybe invite them along. But there's specific advice. Explain the group format beforehand, make it clear they can just observe or participate, whatever they're comfortable with. And this is important, don't change the group's focus just because they're there. That can feel artificial. It also mentions specific events that might connect with their interests, like maybe seminars on practical topics, finances, marriage, or holiday services, Christmas, Easter, or even watching a Christian video together, like the Jesus film it mentions, finding that shared ground, within a faith context.
The guy then circles back to the person showing the care.
Yeah.
He quotes Jesus. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What's the point being made there?
That's a really insightful connection. The source explains that as you actually invest your time, your prayer, maybe even some financial resources to show this care, what it calls God's love to someone, your own heart, your own love for that person genuinely grows stronger. And that growing love is what they'll eventually see and feel. It makes them curious, like, why do you care so much? And that curiosity, that's what creates the natural opportunity to share later on. It's fascinating, this idea that the act of giving actually changes you, deepens your affection, which then becomes visible. It's sort of a positive feedback loop.
Okay, so all this patient work, the observation, the care, the listening, it's all building towards these potential moments. When that invitation finally comes, when they seem ready for something deeper, the source has this section ready to share. But right at the start, there's this really strong, repeated warning, don't rush. That feels counterintuitive for some approaches to sharing faith, maybe.
Oh, absolutely. And it can't be stressed enough, especially for anyone used to more, let's say, direct or even confrontational methods. The source insists you rely on, again, God's responses to your prayers and the real impact of your kindness to soften and open the person's heart first. And crucially, really listen to their life story first before you even think about sharing yours. Which brings up a good question for you listening. In a world that's all about speed and results, how might this really deliberate, unhurried approach change how we think about effectiveness in building connections? I know for me that don't rush reminder is surprisingly hard to follow sometimes.
So keeping that don't rush principle in mind, how do you actually know when it's the right time? The source talks about listening for your invitation and gives specific types of questions that signal readiness.
Yes, it breaks it down into three main categories of questions that act as invitations. First, what it calls biblical questions. Things like, why does God allow suffering? Or, why didn't God answer my prayer? The advice is, answer clearly, keep it concise, be compassionate. If you honestly don't know, say so. Offer to find out. Maybe ask someone more experienced or read up on it. The source mentions consulting Christian books on witnessing or apologetics, which just means sharing and explaining the faith. And if the question feels more like an argument, it suggests just sharing about your own personal reliance on God. Second category, opinion questions like, what's your take on that church controversy in the news? Here, the advice is, be honest, careful, respectful, gentle. Try to point towards God and the Bible, as the source puts it. You could share a personal experience or a relevant bit of scripture, but don't feel pressured to have an instant opinion. Maybe ask them what they think and why it matters to them. The key is avoiding arguments and finding common ground. And the third type, which is maybe the most significant, personal questions. These are questions like, why are you doing all this for me? Or why do you care so much? Or even deeper, do you think there's any hope for someone like me? The source calls these the holy place of sharing. These signal the person is really opening up and inviting you in.
Wow, that holy place of sharing. So when you get that kind of deep, personal invitation, what do you actually share then?
When that moment comes, the source outlines a clear two-part process. First, you share your own personal story, your experience of what the source calls receiving Jesus, and how that decision has genuinely impacted your life, your testimony. And only after that do you share what it calls God's story, the bigger picture, the narrative of God's love and purpose as understood in this faith tradition. First personal, then the broader story.
What a journey we've covered in this deep dive. It's quite something. From that bedrock of consistency prayer, really getting to know someone through the huge impact of just listening well and all those practical acts of kindness. And it all leads patiently towards recognizing that moment, that invitation to share something really personal.
Exactly. The underlying message throughout the source seems to be that genuine love shown consistently through real care and deep listening. That's what naturally creates the right space, the right context for these potentially life-changing conversations. If you look at the big picture, it's really a blueprint for building relationships so authentically that deeper understanding just happens. It's not forced. It's a natural outcome of the connection you've built.
So as we wrap up, here's something to think about, reflecting on this deep dive. What's one specific act of kindness from that list, or maybe one of those 5 stages of listening that you feel prompted to try out or perhaps refine this week? And how might that one small intentional step maybe lead to an aha moment in one of your own relationships? Lots to consider there. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.